Yeah, that's about it. So now introductions. Hi, I'm Ella. I talk a lot. I am one of the Secretary Generals for this year. If you don't know what that means, which I hope you do, but if you don't, I'm basically one of two of the top people in charge who kind of run a lot of everything. Catherine here, she is the other Secretary General. I'm in 12th grade. We both are seniors, me and Catherine. I've been doing JMUN for like 7 years, and I go to Patrick Henry High School. And yeah, so go ahead, whoever wants to. Noah, oh, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Raina. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I go to Patrick Henry, same as Ella. I'm a junior and I'm staffing UNDP, and I've been doing JMUN for about 6 years now. So yeah, I'm excited to go over ROP with you guys.
Oh yeah, I forgot to say, my pronouns are she, her, hers also.
And lastly, I am Noah. I am a senior at Scripps Ranch High School, he, him, his, and I'm the head chair of the Economic and Social Council, or EcoSoc. And I'm also really excited to talk about ROP because it's a super important topic.
Okay, cool. I will start sharing the slides so we can get started. Okay, General Rules of Procedure, also known as ROP. Let's get started. So we're just going to briefly go over the agenda for today. So we're going to start off with an introduction, like an overview of ROP. Then we're going to go into some more specific points and motions that you guys are going to be making during conference. Then we'll go into some basic rules of procedure that you need to know, and we'll finish up with some final tips, some resources for you guys, and some additional reminders moving forward. So to start off, an introduction. So what are the rules of procedure? So rules of procedure are basically all of the rules and for how a committee functions and how debate is going to be run. They allow MUN committees to be unique, orderly, and functional, to have as much good conversation as we can possibly have in debate. So why do we learn ROP? If the committee is structured in this way, then it's important for every delegate to have a clear understanding of everything they're going to need to be doing during debate so that we can run as smoothly as possible. By knowing the ROP through and through, you're going to have the best JMUN experience you can, and we're going to be able to get the most stuff done and solve the most world problems. Some notes and reminders. So to start off, placards. So if you don't know what placards are, each delegate obviously is representing a different country. So these are the way that your dais is going to be able to know who is who and how you're going to kind of motion to be recognized by the chair for any purpose that you might have during debate. So it's essentially just going to be a piece of paper with your country written on it, and it's kind of to signal who's who. Don't worry yet about how or why to use your placard. We'll go into that more during the Flow of Debate webinar. Just for now, know that you're going to have one and you're going to be using it during conference. So for speaking in the third person, as we mentioned with the placards, you are going to be speaking as a country during debate. So you wouldn't be saying, I think we should support this resolution. You would be saying something like, the delegate from Cuba thinks we should support this resolution, or Cuba supports this resolution. And that's just procedurally how we go about debating during JMUN. So it's important to know.
So if I'm a delegate in a committee and I'm representing Cuba, like she said, then me, Noah Hampshire, no longer exists. And so if I want to say that Noah Hampshire believes something, then I can't say that, or I can't say that I believe something. I have to say that the state of Cuba, or the delegate representing Cuba, or just for short Cuba, believes something. So yeah, that's just like one way that we maintain professionalism, and also it lets people know what country you are, so nobody forgets and everybody knows who has which policy. So points and motions are the ways that you guys use the rules of procedure to get things done in committee. So these are the two different channels that you have to control what goes on. So points, first of all, are to raise some sort of concern. So that's when you sort of step out of this third person role, and there are three different kinds of points that you can make. So first is a point of inquiry, and a point of inquiry is when like you don't know what's going on, whether somebody has made a motion that you don't understand, or there's something going on with the rules of procedure that you're just sort of lost and you don't know where you are, what you're supposed to be doing, then you can just back up and say point of inquiry and ask whatever question you have, and the chair will make sure that you understand and that everything is going to be okay. So that one is used a lot, and that is totally something that you can use whenever you are confused. If it's a super tiny thing and you think that you can like figure it out and live without the knowledge, then you don't need to be making a point of inquiry because it can get excessive. But for the most part, make sure that you're comfortable doing that. So that's the important one. And then point of personal privilege is like if you need to go to the bathroom, or if it's really hot and you want to open a window, I guess that would be more for in person. But say if you're having technical difficulties and you need something to get figured out, or if you can't hear someone very well and you want to let them know that their audio isn't working, then you can say point of personal privilege so that that accommodation can be met. And then third, and this is very rarely used, is a point of order, which is where if you think something is going wrong with the rules of procedure, you can let your chair know, point of order, that thing has been done wrong, we should go back and try to change it. And then motions are much more common. And see, there's a lot more different types of motions. So this is when you're suggesting that the committee does something. And it can range from a whole host of things. So you can motion to open debate, and that one will probably get passed. So the chair would say, are there any points or motions on the floor? You would say, you would raise your placard, and then if you were called on, you say motion to open debate, or the delegate from Cuba or wherever motions to open debate. And then the committee votes on that, and then it'll probably be passed, and then you proceed on to complete that action. Or on the contrary, if you, for example, motion to change the default speaking time from 2 minutes to 1 minute, then the chair can then say, okay, let's vote on that. And then if the rest of the committee doesn't want that and the majority votes no on it, then the motion will not be passed. So the common thing between points and motions is that you raise your placard before you make them, and you only make them when the chair asks, are there any points or motions on the floor? The only exception to that would be if it were a point of personal privilege that's more urgent.
All right, so now some basic rules of procedure that you'll need to know for the conference. So roll call. Roll call is when the dais will essentially take attendance of who's in the committee room. And when your country is called, you as a delegate will have two choices. You will either say present or present in voting. The difference between the two is that if you are present in voting, you cannot abstain on any vote that the committee takes during debate, whereas if you are present, you can abstain from substantive matters such as voting on whether to pass resolutions or amendments to resolutions. So I feel like there's a common misconception in JMUN that if you are going to be a competitive delegate that you would always say present in voting, but this is not necessarily the case. You will not be docked points for saying present. That is not something that happens. If you are present in voting, that might mean that your country is more relevant to the topic being discussed, such as if you're discussing like water crisis and you represent South Africa, who's in a severe water crisis, it might be more appropriate per your country's policy to say present in voting as opposed to present, but that is up to you. And generally, you should decide on whether you're present or present in voting before debate starts so that we can move through roll call as quickly as possible. So the speakers will...
Just to interrupt just for 1 second, like the way to decide is if you aren't really sure, like if you're on the fence about some of the resolutions and you want to keep open the possibility of abstaining on some of the resolutions in a topic, then you will want to say just present and not present in voting. But if you have an opinion, or if you think that by the end of the committee you will have an opinion on every resolution, then it's best to say present in voting because it just shows that you're invested in the topic. So like she said, you're not going to get, there's no point difference. It's not really like important to your performance. but if as long as you're planning on voting, it's better to just say present and voting.
Yep. Okay. So moving on to the speakers list. The speakers list is kind of the default level of debate in the committee. So when there's no other forms of debate, such as moderated or unmoderated caucuses, which we will get to in a second, you just revert automatically back to the speakers list. And this is just a rotation of one at a time, delegates giving speeches on the topic being discussed. So this is a great opportunity when you're in the speakers list. The chair will often ask, call for points or motion. That's when you can motion to go into, say, an unmod or a mod. But this is when delegates just give speeches. You can give speeches on really anything. This is kind of moving into the next point. But speeches are your opportunity to make an impression on the committee and voice your policy in debate. So you can, in a speech, maybe persuade the committee to vote in favor of a resolution, or do the opposite, persuade them to vote against it. You can, just talk about your policy on the topic. You can suggest a new solution for maybe an amendment. It's open floor for you to get your policy and your opinions into the conversation. So,
and then I just want to interrupt because somebody just had a question that's relevant to what you're talking about. Of how do you get on the speakers list. So once the debate is opened, one of the first things the chair will do is ask if there are any points or motions on the floor, and somebody will have to make a motion to open the speakers list, and then the person who makes that motion or who gets called on to make that motion will get asked if they want to be added to the speakers list first, and generally you would say yes if you're making that motion. And then after that, they will say, all those who are wishing to be added to the speakers list, please raise your placards or raise your hands. And then when your placard is raised, they will call out who gets added, and then the page will add them onto the speakers list. So if we're in a virtual setting, there'll probably be something shared where everybody can see people getting added to that actual list as they get called on. So you just get added by raising your placard.
Yep. And underneath speakers list where it says change number, at any point during debate, a delegate might motion to change the number of speeches on a speakers list, either to accelerate debate or maybe to create more opportunity for a certain topic to be discussed. So just look for that in debate and know that you can motion to change the number of speeches on a speakers list. You would just raise your placard, chair would call you, and you say motion to change the number of speakers on the speakers list to blank, whatever you want to in the moment. Okay, so moving into speeches, I talked about this a little, but this is your space to talk about your policy, and it's the bulk of debate. So for setting speaking time, sometimes the speaking time can seem either extended or like it's not enough time for the debate that's happening in the room. So a delegate is welcome to motion to change speaking time to any time frame that is considered reasonable by the chairs, which will be voted on by the committee. So yielding, if you are giving a speech and you have time remaining in your clock for speaking time when you finish, you are free to yield your time to another delegate in the room or back to the chair. So if you just want to be done and finished with your speech, you would say, I yield my time to the chair, and that ends your time and gives the time back to the chair and the committee. Or if you have maybe an ally who's going to share a similar position with you or someone that you want to hear from, you can say, for example, I yield my time to Cuba. And then Cuba would get the remaining of your speaking time to present their own policy on whatever is being discussed. So the right of reply is if in a speech your country is referred to by another delegate and you feel that you should be able to or need to respond to maybe correct something they said. So if a delegate made a direct attack on your country or a false statement, you're allowed to raise your placard and be called on by the chair, and you would say, for example, Cuba wishes to invoke the right of reply about the statement just made by whoever made the statement. And this is your chance to kind of respond if something is said about you maybe incorrectly, and a way to kind of have a little bit of back and forth about something. For example, a context that this might come up is if a country states a statistic about your country that maybe is untrue and you feel that you want to correct it. It's a great place to kind of establish your knowledge of your own country's policy in debate. So, yes.
Then somebody just asked a question about if somebody yields their time to you, but you don't want to go. So this is a pretty rare kind of instance. Most people don't yield their time to other delegates. And if you are going to yield your time to another delegate, make sure you work it out with them beforehand. There's something that they want to say. So the context in which this would happen is if two delegates are part of the same resolution group, or they're part of the same voting block, they want something to get done together. But there's lots of people competing to give speeches, then they will say that if one of the two of us gets chosen to speak first, then we can hand it off to the other person so that both of us get a chance to agree with each other. But it doesn't happen very often. So I wouldn't be worried about having somebody yield their time to you unexpectedly. And then I just got another question. If somebody gets yielded time, can that person yield their time to someone else? There's only so much time in a given speech, so that would be a very rare exception, because let's say the speech is a minute and a half, then that means that somebody is going to cut out a portion of their speech to give to two other people. That probably won't happen.
Yeah, but it technically could, most likely will not.
Yeah. And then also, another question, is there a set time for speeches? Which Raina kind of talked about a little bit with when you motion to make a speech, or when you motion to open the speakers list, unless you add a specific time, if you can, when that person makes the motion, they can say, motion to open the speakers list for 2-minute speeches. But generally, they won't say anything, and the head chair will just say, this is the default speaking time. If you make a motion and you don't add your own speaking time, then you just have to go with the default. And so that default will be based on the discretion of the chair. But other than that, it'll be based on the discretion of the person who makes the motion.
Yep. Any more questions?
That is all I see.
Okay, cool. Again, just a reminder, don't message me. I will not see it because I'm sharing my screen right now. So, okay, going forward. Comments. So comments directly follow speeches and are a chance for other delegates in the room to kind of state their opinion on the speech that was just given. Comments are not a place to say something that is not in context of the speech that was just given. That's what speeches are for. Comments are directly related to the speech that was just given. So after a speech is given, the chair will be, are there any comments on the floor? And you would raise your placard, get called on, and that's when you would get the chance to do a comment. So comments are shorter than speeches and are a delegate's place to either disagree or agree with the position stated in the speech given by another delegate. This is a good way to kind of see who's agreeing with what policies, maybe see where your allies are, who you want to work with, that kind of thing, and just to get debate moving forward on any matter that's being discussed in committee. So comments, same as speeches, you can change the number of comments by motioning. The chair would then, take that motion and the committee would vote on it. You can raise the number of speeches, decrease them, anything that you feel is right in the context of committee. Similarly, you can also change the time of speeches, comments. So comments always have a shorter speaking time than speeches, but you can raise it or lower it as is deemed fit in committee. And that would be voted on by the committee room by a simple majority, which is half. Okay. There we go. Okay, questions. So although there is no specific time allotted for questions, you may ask a rhetorical question that doesn't require a direct response in the form of a comment, or if you need a response about a specific question, you could ask it during an unmod or by a private message towards a specific delegate.
If you decide that you'd like to, you can make a motion to add questions to the end of speeches. Like you could say, motion to change the default to a speech, one comment, and one question or something like that. So that would be another context in which it would show up. But the default is no questions.
Okay. So a moderated caucus is a form of debate in which delegates make short comments on a specific sub-issue of the topic being presented. For example, if you were talking about education as a topic, a subtopic of it might be women's access to education. And so it's just basically a smaller, more specific area of discussion that the committee wants to focus on. So typically delegates who are interested in speaking will raise up their placards and the chairs will call on delegates to speak one at a time. So this is something that is motioned for. So a delegate would raise their placard when the chair calls for points or motions and say it's motion to have a moderated caucus. And when you are motioning for a moderated caucus, you need to state that it is a moderated caucus, the subtopic you wish to discuss, the time, the total time of the moderated caucus, and the speaking time. So as an example, let's say I was motioning for a moderated caucus and I was Cuba again. So I could say Cuba motions for a 10-minute moderated caucus with a 30-second speaking time on the topic of women's access to education. And then each delegate would get 30 seconds to speak. And this is kind of a way to go quickly through different policies and discussion on a certain aspect of committee. And unmoderated caucuses are basically an open forum. So it allows delegates to move freely around the committee room, talking a little more informally. It's less structured. Delegates, again, motion for an unmoderated caucus, and all you have to say is that you want to unmod and that the length of the unmod. So you could say Cuba motions for a 10-minute unmoderated caucus. And this is a great place to kind of find allies, work on maybe amendments for resolutions, kind of talk about policies, talk about speeches and allyship and resolution discussion. It's a great place for kind of a less structured debate format to happen. So extensions, you can extend any kind of caucus, moderated or unmoderated. It's voted on by a simple majority, and it's basically just extending the amount of time if the committee room feels that the given time of the caucus was not enough. So the extension may not be longer than 50% of the original set time. And this is motioned for by a delegate at the end of a caucus. And the extension may not alter individual speaking times or the specific given topic. It's just extending what is already there. So amendments is something that delegates can work on and submit to alter resolutions that are discussed during committee. So a friendly amendment is when the sponsor of the resolution signs the amendment. They give their consent for it to be modified to the resolution, added to the resolution. Once introduced and signed by the sponsor of the resolution, friendly amendments are immediately incorporated into the draft resolution. There's no need for the committee room to vote on it because the sponsor of the resolution has already agreed to it. Unfriendly are the opposite. The sponsor of the resolution maybe does not agree with the amendment and does not want to add it to their resolution. So those are introduced to the floor by giving the chairs a copy of the amendment. For an unfriendly amendment to be given to the chairs, it requires a 1/5 of the delegates in the room to be signatories to it, which means that they kind of approve it to be introduced to debate. This motion is informal and ideally takes place during or shortly after an unmoderated caucus where it would be written. The committee would move into a voting procedure on it. A simple majority is required to pass an unfriendly amendment, which means 50% of the delegates that are voting. And if that is passed by a simple majority, then it is incorporated into the resolution and would be considered when the resolution is being voted on, whether it passes or not.
So, I just want to answer, you sort of talked about it, but I just want to emphasize because I just got a question about unfriendly amendments. So just again, to mark the distinction. So a friendly amendment is when you have the like permission or the signature of the person who wrote the resolution, whereas an unfriendly amendment is going against the person that wrote the resolution, or is like basically against the wishes of the person that wrote that resolution. So friendly amendments automatically, nobody needs to vote on them, they just automatically go into the resolution as long as they have enough signatures, whereas or as long as they have like the consent of the person, whereas an unfriendly amendment needs to be voted on. And it needs to pass, like she said, a simple majority in order to be implemented. And then when do you motion for a caucus? Anytime the head chair says, are there any points or motions on the table? As long as it's after debate has been opened, that is an opportunity for you to motion for any kind of caucus, whether it's moderated or unmoderated or like formal or those things, but those come later. So those are your opportunities to motion for those kinds of things. For basically everything she's talking about.
Okay, cool. And just to be clear, if any questions you guys might have about when these things are implemented during committee are going to be covered in a lot more detail during our next webinar on the flow of debate. So if you're confused on any of that, just know that it will be covered in a lot more detail during the next webinar. So next is voting block. So voting block occurs after the committee has closed formal debate on resolutions, and it is when resolutions are voted on whether they will be passed by the committee or not. So before voting on opening voting block, the dais will ask 2 speakers in the committee to speak for going into voting block and 2 speakers to speak against going into voting block. Why a delegate might be against going into voting block is they may feel that certain resolutions have not been discussed fully, that there's still things to be added in amendments or not, whereas if you're for going into voting block, you would feel the opposite, that everything has been discussed in its entirety. So after those 4 speeches occur, the committee will vote on whether to go into voting block or not. If that passes, then the voting procedure will begin. During voting procedure, no delegates are allowed to leave the committee room. In a normal year, this would mean physically leaving. Now on Zoom, you're not allowed to leave the Zoom call. And there is no passing notes during voting block. No more amendments can be proposed. It's just voting on the resolutions. So the delegates will vote on each resolution by simply raising their placards for or against. A delegate could abstain if they chose present as opposed to present and voting at the beginning of debate. Just a reminder that resolutions are voted on with the amendments that have been passed in committee considered. And resolutions that are passed by a simple majority, again 50%, are adopted by the committee with their amendments. Other kind of miscellaneous vocabulary, dilatory. A chair can deem a motion dilatory if it seeks to kind of obstruct or delay the will of the committee. So if it's not appropriate for debate in the moment, then a chair can rule it dilatory at their own discretion. If a motion is dilatory, it won't be voted on by the committee. And decorum is essentially order in a committee room. So if the chair calls decorum, that means they're asking you guys as delegates to be more respectful and kind of commanding your attention. This would only be used if the committee is being particularly loud or disrespectful in a given moment.
Or if they were in the middle of an unmoderated caucus and it's like there's a lot of discussions going on, then the chair would, to end the unmoderated caucus, would often say dilatory in order to get everybody to be quiet, to hear them say that the time has elapsed for the unmoderated caucus. But yeah, basically anytime they want people to be quiet, that is when that word comes out.
Yeah, and just a note, I think you meant to say decorum. You said dilatory, so just to
I'm sorry.
avoid confusion, they would say decorum.
I meant decorum. And then also, sort of leading into another question that was asked, which is how are we going to do unmoderated caucuses via Zoom? So I imagine, and I don't have like the final answer on this, so if Ella or Catherine want to jump in,
So right now, as we speak, we're working a lot of our details out. But I think what we're leaning towards is breakout rooms, because usually when it's an unmoderated caucus in a real conference, and an in-person, this one's real, an in-person conference, people will actually like organize them, like go into little groups based off of who they want to ally with. So what we're going to do is something, this is not final, but something along the lines of you're going to message Pages or like any staffer and say like if you have someone you would really want to be in a breakout room with, and then once we did an unmoderated caucus, that would be set up. We might like take a second to like set it all up, but you would message a staffer and say, I want to be with Cuba, because maybe you're like, you know, you want to discuss a certain resolution or amendment they had to your resolution. And then everything else will be pretty random, like random groups. And I think like if you want to leave the group, you could come back into the main Zoom and ask to be put in a different one. All the little details will be worked out, but online, you're probably going to be in a breakout room, just so you know. And the staffers will be circling through the breakout rooms to check in and see like, okay, like make sure that you're talking about like actually something. So yeah.
All right. Yeah, and that sounds like a pretty good way to do it, because like she said, generally in unmoderated caucuses, people break off into groups, and those groups are based on how they want to vote, or if they're working on an amendment together, or if those are the people that want to be discussing a specific idea about a specific resolution. So I imagine that breakout rooms will be organized in that kind of way, or to facilitate that sort of function. And then, are you done with this section?
Yes.
Okay. So somebody just asked another question that sort of leads perfectly into this section, which is just sort of like the covering everything, or making sure that we've understood everything, because she just threw so much information at you. So what is the difference between a debate, an unmoderated caucus, and a speakers list? So debate is sort of the general term that we use for like all of this. So when you motion to open debate, that means you're motioning to sort of enter the realm of rules of procedure. So debate is just like that underlying mode that you're in. And so you can suspend debate, whether it's for lunch or for a break or for the end of the day, end of the session. And then you can open debate. And then within debate, then you open up the speakers list. And so that's like sort of the next level that you enter into. And once you've opened the speakers list and everybody has been added to it, that becomes your sort of like default mode of debate. And then from there, you can motion to go into other caucuses, which is like another level. So she talked about some of the different kinds of caucuses. So unmoderated caucuses, which are sort of just free form, and talked about breakout rooms. And you can go to the sheet, by the way, that's at the next slide. And then there are moderated caucuses where you're continuing to give more speeches on more specific topics. And so those are kind of like the different modes or levels of debate that we have. So all of that is just debate, and then there's the speakers list, and then there's like specific caucuses, whether it's an unmoderated caucus, moderated caucus, formal caucus, or voting block. So do you want to go to the next slide?
Yep.
So yeah, these are just covering over most of the things we've already talked about. So yeah, some of the basic vocabulary, like once you go into debate, you're following the rules of procedure, this sort of uniform guidelines. Placards are what you use to make points and motions. Points are sort of entering into your actual self and like trying to clarify something, whereas motions are trying to get the committee to do something. And then, yeah, so this Catherine just posted it for you in the chat. So this is just a resource for you to use and refer to later on. Sort of shorthand of all the information we've already gone through. Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, and I just want to kind of add that link that Catherine just put into the chat, just to reassure you guys now. Don't worry about memorizing all this right now. I know it's a lot of information, but all this is available in these documents that we're going to be sharing with you in the next few slides. So just to reassure you, if you are currently panicking, this will all be in Google Docs at your disposal to refer to until conference.
Yeah, and you can even refer to it during the conference. So more basic points and motions, motioning to enter an unmoderated caucus, which will probably take the form of breakout rooms and sort of chat and but just sort of free form. You get to talk about whatever you want. Moderated caucuses, where that's really, honestly, like, you'll spend most of your time in moderated and unmoderated caucuses during debate. You start out with the speakers list and start to work through it, but then it's much better to use like unmoderated and moderated caucuses for both the delegates and the chair, because with moderated caucuses you can target specific concepts that you want to be talking about, and you can also get through like more people more quickly, because speeches are cumbersome, you have lots of comments and stuff, whereas moderated caucuses, it's just like uniform, like usually 30-second to 90-second chunks of speeches. And for changing number and changing duration, that's for the speakers list specifically. You can't change the number or duration of speeches during a moderated caucus. That is set at the beginning and then can't be changed until it's been exhausted. And then those are some of the points. And then also another one that we didn't talk about is formal caucus, which is something that's used more in MUN, but it's also used in JMUN for the specific purpose of crisis. So at the end of the like crisis component of it, you present your resolutions, and the way that you present your resolutions after you've written them and everything is through a formal caucus, where the people that wrote the resolution or the sponsors of it will speak and then have like question and answer period after they speak and go through the resolution outlining what it's trying to do. So like you would motion for a formal caucus usually of like 10-minute speaking time with 6 minutes for speaking and 4 minutes for Q&A or something like that. But that's just for that one part of committee. So that's something that usually will get explained at that point as well. And then another question, a moderated caucus, is a moderated caucus just where people give speeches about a certain topic? Yes, that is exactly what a moderated caucus is. You guys have been asking some great questions, by the way. So yeah, I think that's all of the like vocabulary and points and motions. Or is there another slide of points and motions?
Nope.
So yeah, so this is for Security Council. The rules of procedure themselves are all exactly the same. There's a lot of differences in the way that the debate flows, which we haven't talked very much about today. We've hinted at a few things, but at the next webinar on March 19th, we will be talking specifically about flow of debate and how all the things we've talked about so far factor into actual debate. And so for Security Council, a lot of those things are very different. But the thing that is different about the rules of procedure is what's called veto power. So in Security Council, when you're in voting block and there are all the resolutions on the table, I almost said the floor, there are 5 nations in the Security Council that can choose to veto any given resolution, and then no matter how the rest of them vote, that resolution will not go into effect. So that is how the Security Council in real life works in the United Nations. Basically because the people that started the United Nations wanted to give themselves a certain amount of power. And it's been discussed as to whether or not that should continue in the United Nations or whether or not that is fair and democratic. but that is the way that it is. That is the way that it has been. And so that is the way that we do it in JMUN as well. I actually was in a Malta United Nations conference once that was specifically talking about restructuring the Security Council. It's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. And just to kind of like restate this, veto power is only applicable to the Security Council. So if you're in a General Assembly committee, don't worry about this. Only if you're in Security Council does this apply to you.
And also Regional Security Council, this rule also exists. And it's the big 5 countries, so the United States, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom. Those are the countries that get to just basically nope any resolution that they'd like to. So yeah, I kind of already talked about this. Our next webinar, March 19th, is on specifically flow of debate, or how these rules are implemented into the debate to get you to go from discussing the topic to solving the topic.
Yes. Sorry, just to kind of add. You just learned a lot of definitions of things that are going to be happening in debate, but on our next webinar, you'll be learning how to use all of those things to actually have this successful committee and experience during JMUN. So if you're a little overwhelmed by all the things you just learned and you still don't really know what your committee is going to look like, don't worry, that'll be next time. And you can attend that live or on the YouTube channel where these will all be posted. So don't worry if you're confused right now. And I'm sorry I'm holding my hand like this, but I'm kind of getting themed by this.
So the next steps for you guys to follow are, first of all, because resolutions are going to be due in the first week of April, that you work on those, getting research for those resolutions, and then also for the committees themselves is going to be very important, especially in these like coming couple of months. It's nice to keep up with current events no matter what committee you're in, especially in committees that are discussing topics that are evolving and changing. It's nice to keep up to date and actually sort of invest in these topics. And then, get ready for the Flow of Debate webinar where we will go into more specifics. Any more questions? Oh, I have a question from someone. Why is France on the Security Council but not India? And that is a very good question. Kind of like I said, it's unrelated to ROP, but an interesting question. So when they made the United Nations and they were structuring these things and they decided to give veto power to these 5 nations, India was not as important in the global stage as it is now. It also was I think that was actually before India gained independence. I believe India gained independence after World War II. So they weren't even a country yet, I think, or it was around that time at least. But they are one of the countries, along with Brazil and Germany, that might at some point get veto power if they decide to expand it, which is something that a few people have been talking about. So maybe one day. And when do you receive your resolution packets? I have no idea.
So that'll be around late April. So first you turn it in early April, and then your chairs look it over, grade them, and then they'll choose 7 papers per topic to make the packet, and then we'll distribute that late April.
Any other questions? When do you get your graded position papers? I don't think you'll be receiving the actual grades you got on the position papers for a little while, but you will be receiving feedback pretty soon.
So you guys don't actually get to know your exact points. That's something that's just for the chairs and the staffers to know, because that's how it plays into conference, but you don't know necessarily the exact grade you got, just like how you don't get the exact rubric. But there will be feedback sent out within the next 2 weeks to your advisors, And so every single resolution you turned in, position paper, every single position paper you turned in will have feedback on it. So look towards your advisors for the next 2 weeks. They should be coming out soon-ish. So that's where you'll find it. But no actual exact points.
And then another question, if you are a new delegate and you only write one resolution, how do you prepare for debates on other topics? Which is a great question. So you want to research those topics independent of, I mean, you don't need to write a resolution to research and understand the topic. So you want to sort of prepare some ideas about the topic. You want to prepare some like things that you might say in speeches, and research specifically how your country feels about the topic. So if you wrote a position paper on it, that's a great place to start. Look back at the articles that you were reading at the time that you were researching for your position papers and use that as like sort of a foundation to continue to research and develop a better understanding of those topics. And then once the resolution packet comes out, the best thing you can do to research is to specifically figure out facts that pertain to those resolutions, so you can figure out the ideas that you have about how feasible those resolutions are, which is like a really important thing because you want the resolutions to be functional. So one of the main parts of debate is talking about whether or not certain resolutions are functional. And so you want to prepare by researching that question specifically. Hopefully that is a decent answer to that question. And I don't see any more.
Any last questions before we sign off? Last chance.
I hope this has been helpful. A lot of you have been asking some very, very nice questions. And I hope that we cleared this up for you and that it wasn't boring. And we wish you guys happy resolution writing, happy researching, happy preparing. Very exciting. It's coming up.
Yay.
Great. Thank you, Raina and Noah, for that amazing presentation. So from here, any further questions you have, you can ask your advisor. You could go to office hours and talk to your committee head chair. The office hours are not just for concerns with your committee, they're for concerns with the whole conference. You can rewatch this video. Oh, I have a dog in my sweatshirt. You can rewatch this video on YouTube. You can email us. You can message us on the website. Yeah, there are a lot of great resources out there. But thank you, Noah and Raina.
And I will also be one of the people for the next webinar for Flow of Debate. So if you go to that one, then we'll be talking more about these things, and you will see me again, which I don't know, could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. That's your discretion.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for coming, everyone.